that where his father was assassinated, and then he retaliated. If you see in verse 5 here, chapter 4, he retaliated by murdering the people that kind of had his father assassinated. Verse 5. And it came to pass, as soon as the kingdom was confirmed in his hand, that he slew his servants, which had slain the king. He was assassinated, and the son comes in and had those people killed. And that's kind of how he ascended and why he was there. Okay? But he did obey the these kingdoms. He killed the people who killed the father and then the kids and try to get rid of the entire family. In Scriptures, we have an actual law set in place by God that prohibits the sins of the father being passed on essentially to the children. And killing an enemy's children was a very common thing for pagan kings to do. Okay? We don't see Amaziah doing that here. He did follow that rule, which is good on his part, right? So he didn't do those things, and we'll see some other instances which he kind of followed the laws of God that he was supposed to as well. All right. Amaziah's his first act as king, or his first desire, I guess, as king, was to reduce the enemy of the neighboring country of Edom. And he wanted to reduce it down to just the vessel state, just kind of was theirs, and he kind of used it. And he did that by strengthening his own military. Okay, so he orders a bunch of people to come in, and he pays a bunch of people to come in to boost up his own army. If we go over to 2 Chronicles with me, and jump over to chapter 25, we kind of see him kind of starting to do this. Look at verse 5. Okay, first 4 verses kind of correlate with what we just read. Let's go to verse 5. Moreover, Amaziah gathered Judah together and made them captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, according to the houses of their fathers, throughout all of Judah and Benjamin. And he numbered them from 20 years old and above, and found them 300,000 choice men, able to go forth to war, that could handle both spear and shield. So he wants to reduce the country of Edom. He wants to bolster his own army so that they wouldn't even want to attack and go in and kind of completely get rid of their armies. So he orders in all of these men, 300,000 of them to be exact, all over Judah. In addition to that 300,000 men, we see in verse 6 that he also hired 100,000 mighty men of valor out of Israel. Okay, so he had the other nation brought 100,000 mighty men of valor down, and he paid for those men with 100 talents of silver. Okay, so we see him bringing them in and paying them this extra money, and to make sure that his army was very large and very powerful and very strong. And that nobody would want to kind of come up against him, but he could kind of do whatever he wanted to. Okay, so it's 400,000 men now that he has increased his army by. Okay, it's a large amount of people who were very good with fighting. All right. Now that becomes a problem here in a few years. All right, and it starts if you look in verse 6 or verse 7. Excuse me. We see God kind of stepping in and explaining to him that he doesn't need an army this far. Right? But there come a man of God to him saying, O king, let not the army of Israel go with thee, for the Lord is not with Israel, to wit, with all the children of Ephraim. But if thou wilt go, do it, be strong for the battle. God shall make thee fall before the enemy, for God hath power to help and to cast down. So after these 400,000 men show up, the Lord sends a servant to talk to King Amaziah. Okay? And he tells him that he has no need for 400,000 men. Right? Amaziah was putting his faith in the numbers of his army. Amaziah should have been putting his faith in God. Right? That God would have, any enemy that came in, any conquering that God wanted him to do, God would have allowed him to do that with the army that he had previously. He didn't need this 400,000 extra men. We see if we see a response here to this in verse 9. Okay, and as we read this response, let's just read it first. And Amaziah said to the man of God, "But what shall we do for the 100 talents which I have given to the army of Israel?" And the man of God answered, "The Lord is able to give thee much more than this." So he hears this individual tell him this, and he says, "I've already given these guys this money, and a very large sum anyways. So what am I supposed to do with the fact that I have this money that I've given to them?" And he's complaining that he has spent essentially a whole lot of his treasury to get these guys in here to help his army. And the man of God responds at the last part of verse 9 and says, "The Lord is able to give thee much more than this." All right, so we're talking 100,000 talents of silver that he had given these men, or given each one of them 100 talents of silver, and he's wanting to know how he's going to make up for this loss. And we see the response in verse 9 that God's able to give you a whole much more than that small sum of money. Compared to where God's wealth is, that's a very small amount of money. So what is, the question here is, what is this man, the servant of the Lord, what is he trying to communicate to King Amaziah? By telling him he's got too many people in here and that the money is not the big of a deal. What is he trying to communicate to him about God?
God's able to take care of it.
Exactly, right? God's power, God's wealth, God's grace, there is no limit to it, right? Amaziah sees this, if we take 100,000 times 100, that's, how much money is that? 100,000 times 100 is
100 times.
10 million, right? So it's 10 million talents of silver that he had pulled out of his treasury. So that's a great loss for him. The servant of the Lord is trying to explain to him that God's power, His grace, His ability to cover essentially anything is limitless. There is no amount that Amaziah could put on. Go to verse 9. And Amaziah said to the man of God, "But what shall we do for the 100 talents which I have given to the army of Israel?" Verse 10, excuse me. "Then Amaziah separated them to wit, the army that was come to him out of Ephraim to go home again. Wherefore their anger was greatly kindled against Judah, and they returned home in great anger." So we see Amaziah doing what to the 100,000 men from Israel? Sends them back. Okay. And what was the response from these 100,000 men? They weren't happy, right? They were not happy because they had been sent back. Now, remember that. Okay, that's going to become important here in just a little bit. He sends them back, and they become very upset because of it. They go home in great anger, it says. If you go to verse 13 of chapter 25, it says, "But the soldiers of the army which Amaziah sent back, that they should not go with him to battle, as they're heading back, they fall upon the cities of Judah from Samaria, even unto Bethhoron, and smote 3,000 of them, and took much spoil." So as they're heading back to Israel, what do? They raid and plunder some of the cities of Judah, right? And they kill people in the midst. There's 100,000 people, men, show up, and they are raiding King Amaziah's cities and killing his people and taking the spoils and taking stuff out of each of these cities as they're on their way back, as a revenge and as showing King Amaziah essentially how mad they were. Great quantities of spoil they take out of here, and a whole bunch of things that they kind of pull from these cities. All right, so we see God promising Amaziah blessing. Go ahead, Landon, hit it for me. Keep going through there just to kind of show. We see the hiring, the mercenaries, and then the cities that they raided as they were headed back to Samaria as well, and the spoils and stuff they took from them. Keep going, man. One more time for me, please. All right, so verses 11, 12, and 13 here in chapter 25, we see Amaziah getting victory, God giving him that victory, because his troops now had been reduced a quarter, 25%. And he leads this army into the Valley of Salt, which is an 8-mile area near the border of Judah and Edom, and there they have a battle with the Edomites. Verse 11. And Amaziah strengthened himself and led forth his people, and went to the valley of Salt, and smote the children of Seir, the Edomites, 10,000. And another 10,000 left alive did the children of Judah carry away captive, and brought them onto the top of the rock, and cast them down from the top of the rock, and they were all broken in pieces. But the soldiers of the army which Amaziah sent back, that should not go with him to battle, fell upon the cities of Judah from Samaria, even unto Beth-horon, and smote 3,000 of them, and took much spoil. Okay, so verse 14 let's start right there. So 25% reduction in his forces. He goes into the Valley of Salt and near Edom and defeats the Edomites and slaughters, as we saw in verse 11, 10,000 of the Edomites' men. They then captured an additional 10,000. We see in verse 12. They then marched them to Selah. And Selah is known as present-day what? Does anybody know? Yeah, Selah is known as present-day Petra. Right? Selah is known as present-day Petra. Now, what do we know about Petra? What was kind of famous about the city or the place of Petra? Do we know anything about Petra? We may not. It's fine if you don't. It's a place of refuge. And why is it such a good place of refuge? What is it built out of? Or how is it? Rock. Yeah, right? The whole thing is carved into a rock. As a matter of fact, it's still there today. If you go on your phone or on Google and type in Petra, you can see the opening of the carvings on the wall or on the mountain. It's a Edomite. It was their Statue of Liberty, right? It was their Grand King. It was their really big deal. They were very proud of it because it was very hard to get into. It was very well fortified, and you can only get into it by a narrow passage, both in and out. So they go to Petra, the pride of Edom. And if we go to Obadiah, we'll kind of flip over there, but it talks a little more about Petra. And this was a fortress carved out of rock, and they were only available to get there through very narrow passages. And as we see as they get there, verse 12, they carry away captives and brought them to the top of the rock and cast them down from the top of the rock, that they were all broken into pieces. So we see that the victory that Amaziah was worried about in calling up all these soldiers, once he listened to God and sent the soldiers back, God then gave him the victory that he was concerned about over the Edomites. So we see direct correlation here in Amaziah's life. God says, do something. Amaziah does that thing, and then when he does it, what happens? He's rewarded, right? He's blessings because of it. So we see Amaziah now, he has physical evidence of listening to God leads to blessings. Okay? And we see that him getting that victory. But, verse 14. Let's see. Go ahead there. Oh, that's my voice. Go ahead, Landon. And there is, stop right there for me, please. There is where, in between Edom and just off the border of Judah, is the Valley of Salt, 8-mile stretch of land. Go ahead there, Landon. And that's where Judah defeats the Edomites and marches 10 captains of 2,000 captives of Petra that cast them off from a cliff and saw them kind of being destroyed because of it. One more time. And bring up C for me. Good. And God judges now because of Amaziah's idolatry. We saw at the beginning of his reign, he wasn't completely and entirely consistent with his following after God, so he gets judged because of it. Verse 14 of chapter 25. Now it came to pass that after Amaziah was come from the slaughter of the Edomites, that he brought the gods of the children of Seir and set them up to be his gods, and bowed down before him and burned incense unto him. Now, okay, right? As I was going through this, right, we've seen this now. Amaziah did exactly what God asked him to do, and was blessed because of it. As soon as this over gets back, what's the very next thing we read about King Amaziah? What's he do? Does he offer up sacrifices and thank God for his victory? No, right? And we see this and we think, why are these people continuing? Why are these kings over and over and over again? It's just like this broken record, isn't it? This broken record of God blessing these people because they follow after him, And then almost instantly, it's like they forget very quickly what God's done for them, and they go right back to their terrible ways. And we see him offering up sacrifices and incenses before these pagan deities. Now, if you had been around Amaziah, maybe one of his advisors or whatever it was, if you had been with Amaziah as he is in the process of setting up these idols from Edom, what would you say to him?
Are you
Right, that you would think. Are you kidding me? Why are you doing this? Have you not figured out this process? Right? What happens when this whole thing kind of takes place? But Amaziah, again, knowing the sins of his fathers, knowing probably the history and what had happened, we see him following into the same way, into the same error of his fathers. And we get to verse 15. And wherefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Amaziah. Of course it was, we think. So he sent to him a prophet, which said unto him, Why hast thou sought after the gods of the people, which could not deliver their own people out of thine hand? So a prophet again is sent to King Amaziah from the Lord, asking him why he did these things. Now, we see Amaziah's train of thought here. Okay? And we see his response to God giving him victory. Let's look on the other side of the aisle. What do you think is going through God's head? How many times now has God sent people to these kings to ask them why or tell them that they shouldn't do this? How many times has this happened? We can't count. We probably could go back and count, but it's been a whole bunch of them, right? Do you not think that at some point, right? I deal with teenagers every day, love them to death, but a lot of times I've got to say things 3 and 4 times, right, before they eventually do it. Now that I have to repeat myself once, so a lot of times they know that they're in trouble, right? Usually when common says something that means it, I expect it to be done. And a lot of times it's not, and I get upset, and they know that, and have a little heart-to-heart, and kind of get things figured out, and we go on forward. When God is... I guess the point I'm trying to get to is how voracious is God's love, right? And how limitless, and how patient, and how we can't fathom it, right? I've tried to wrap my mind around how many times God has allowed these people, and He's continuing over and over and over again to be patient with them and gracious with them and try to get them to see the error of our ways. If we were in God's position, it couldn't be, I know, just go with it. If we were in God's position, if these people, this individuals kept doing what you didn't want them to do, even after you tried to get them, will we not get upset? And not mention just be like, right, if I got a 16-year-old boy that doesn't want to listen to me 3 or 4 times, all right, bud, go figure it out and you screw up on your own. I'm trying to help you, but I can only do so much, right? But God, we see it time and time and time again being gracious to these people. And we look at this and we see these instances and we kind of shake our head, kind of smack ourselves, and I couldn't believe it. But on the other end of that, for us as Christians, aren't we thankful for the fact that God is that gracious, and He is that patient, and He is that loving with us? Because how many times do we do the same thing over and over and over again? We know that God's going to punish us for our sins. He has to. But yet He's still loving, and when we see the error of our ways, He accepts us back in and brings us back and puts us on the straight and narrow, puts us back in the direction that we're supposed to go. And we may only be there for a couple of weeks, right? And we do it again, we mess up again. God brings us back into it. Same thing here, right? So He has to judge. He has to judge sin. That's who God is. That's who He has to be. So the prophet comes and confronts him. Verse 16, "It came to pass, as he talked with him, that the king said unto him, Art thou made the king's counsel forbear? Why shouldest thou be smitten? Then the prophet forbare and said, I know that God hath determined to destroy thee, because thou hast done this, and hast not hearkened unto my counsel. Then Amaziah, king of Judah, took advice, and sent Joash, the son of Jehoaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, Come, let us see one another in face. And Joash, king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, The thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, Give thy daughter to my son to wife. And there passed by a wild beast that was in Lebanon, and trode the thistle down. Thou sayest, Lo, the man hath smitten the Edomites, and thy heart lifted thee up to boast. Abide now at thy home. Why shouldest thou meddle to thine hurt, that thou shouldest fall, even thou, and Judah with thee? But Amaziah would not hear, for it came of God, that he might deliver them into the hand of their enemies, because they sought after the gods of Edom. So Joash, the king of Israel, went up, and they saw one another in the face, both he and Amaziah, king of Judah, at Bethshemesh, which belongeth to Judah. And Judah was put to the worst before Israel, and they fled every man to his tent. And Joash, the king of Israel, took Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, the son of Jehoaz, at Bethshemesh, and brought him to Jerusalem, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of God, Obed-Edom, thank you, and the treasures of the king's house, the hostages also, and returned to Samaria. And Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived after the death of Joash, the son of Jehoaz, king of Israel, 15 years. Now the rest of the acts of Amaziah's first and last, behold, are they not written in the book of the king of Judah and the king of Israel? All right, so we see now the man, the servant, coming and talking to King Amaziah. The victory that, the victory that he had just had over Edom had emboldened him, and it kind of filled his pride up a little bit. And the prophet comes in and points out the absolute powerlessness of these idols, of the people that Amaziah had just destroyed, right? If these idols were powerful, then you wouldn't have destroyed these people, right? If they worked at all, then you wouldn't have, their gods would have conquered you. But Amaziah doesn't see it this way, and when the prophet kind of asked him about, figure this out, these idols obviously didn't work, Amaziah couldn't answer the question without making himself look inferior or look stupid in some way. So he resorts, as we saw in verse 16 there, to telling the prophet that he needs to stop talking, stop being there at all, or he's going to have it killed. The prophet, though, kind of gets in the last word because he informs Amaziah in verse 16 and 17 that God is going to kill him, going to destroy him for his foolish actions. All right? 15 years later, in verse 27 of chapter 25, we see that in Lachish, they sent to Lachish, verse 27, if you look under with me, please. And after the time Amaziah had turned away from the following of the Lord, they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish, but they sent to Lachish after him, and there before he slew him. All right, so 15 years later, the prophecy that this man told him came true. So the victory that he had over Edom made him challenge his advisors and challenged Israel to a battle because he thinks his armies are stronger than everybody else's. There's going to be, now once this prophet leaves, there's going to be this battle now between the two nations of Israel and Judah. And this impending war that was going to happen, this comes from the fact that these two nations now are getting ready to battle. This stems directly from Amaziah's ordering of the 100,000 men from Israel. Right? We've seen those guys now go back. They're upset, and they're still upset. Obviously, sometime later now, they've gone to the king there in Israel, and there's going to be a battle now, a civil war between these two nations. And it stems from his ordering of these 100,000 troops, and then their destruction of the Judah cities as they were heading back to Israel. So Amaziah sends a message to King Jehoash, who was the king in Israel. King Jehoash then responded to Amaziah's challenge. We saw that starts in verse 18 of 2 Chronicles. And he responds to the challenge, and he responds to it in the form of a story or the form of a parable, right? King Jehoash verse 18, king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, and this was Thistle and Lebanon and all the stuff we read there, that was the story or the parable that he told him. Essentially what he is telling him in those 3 verses is that he told him it was going to be ridiculous for Amaziah to try to compare himself with the king in Israel, right? There's no comparison here. Don't even try to do it. And if they did try to do it, it would be likened to a wild animal from Lebanon treading down a simple little thistle. Right? That's what we saw there in verses 18 down through all the way down to verse 24. Jehoash didn't wait to attack. He confronted the army of Judah at Beth Shemesh, which was an ancient city right around the country of the Philistines. And when they showed up, Judah's army, we saw verses 19 down to verse 21, they fled. Amaziah is taken captive during this battle. The Israelites break open a 200-yard section of the wall of Jerusalem, right into the temple, the royal palace, and take a bunch of stuff out. Verse 24 kind of finished up this battle. We see Jehoash taking some of the nobles from the temple as hostage and going back to Samaria. Okay? And 15 years later brought the death of Amaziah as we saw. All right, now, looking at this 8 or 9 verses here that we have, what did King Amaziah believe about the sufficiency of God's grace? We see what happened now, right? He had a big victory against Edom. We didn't see what happens in the few months and years following. What do you think Amaziah believed about the sufficiency of God's grace? What does his actions prove about his thoughts about the sufficiency? That God's grace was too limited to satisfy him and to help him in any way whatsoever. And because of that, we see that he died and lost his life. Because we hit that thing a few times when we landed. We should go ahead and run through that map too, just kind of break everything up. So we see Amaziah, go back one for me please. After the battle there, we see Amaziah fleeing from his conspirators, and eventually is killed there and caught. And Lachish is where he died, just as the prophet of the Lord told him would happen 15 years ago. Go ahead, Lana, one more time. All right, we're not going to get into this week. We don't have time. We'll finish this up next week. We'll be back in 2 Kings. We're going to see God's grace for Israel's Jeroboam II. Okay? And if his father happens, we see Jeroboam kind of God giving him some grace because of some of the stuff that he did. And then eventually, we see God's judgment on Israel as well. Now, this interesting thing we'll see next week, during Jeroboam II's reign, the Lord gave Israel ample time to have a repentance or a revival. Gave him ample time for him to did a lot of stuff for me and gave them some time to kind of come back. But, of course, as this history and cycle kind of goes, we kind of see some of that kind of happening. Apostasy continues to happen and eventually leads to Israel's destruction and the Assyrians coming in and capture. Okay, so we'll get into that next week and hopefully be able to get this lesson finished up. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for the lesson we had this morning and for seeing how you were gracious to these men when they were willing to follow after you and that you brought judgment on them when they didn't. And it's kind of the same thing we've seen now for several weeks, but it's just a constant reminder, first of all, of your grace. I'm thankful for it, but also a reminder of your judgment when we don't do what we're supposed to. Now, you will and you have to punish us, and you have to chastise us, and bring us back to the fold. Sometimes that means going up to the woodshed and getting with it. That's just the way it has to be. But we thank you for the fact that you love us enough to correct us and show us the error. Pray for Pastor August that comes in next hour as well. Just use him, Lord, and keep us attentive to the word he has for us this morning. And I pray.
How down, ma'am?
I'm still kicking, not high, but I'm kicking.
Leave that up for a second. Wonder at what point
I think
it's working.
the thing's too far.
What's that?
I think the like the USB thing, like this thing,
Uh-huh.
is so far down there that it won't.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
We might have to buy one of those cord things. Oh shoot, like an extender almost.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, and then just
Let's
see
stick
if
it
it'll.
Yeah. I just want to see what point it was or that back.